The Scottish Government takes my hard-earned cash and spends it on telling me how to run my political party contrary to its own principles. The Electoral Reform Society in Scotland has backed calls for a law that would force political parties to put forward 50% male, 50% female candidates for each election in Scotland. Now, such a law would force the Scottish Family Party to operate in a way that's fundamentally opposed to its principles. Also, as a small party, we might struggle to actually do that, to be able to provide sufficient candidates with that condition applied. That would apply to other small parties as well. So some parties would be excluded from the political process because of this rule. Now, it's a fact that women overall, in general, tend to be less interested in politics and less drawn to public life. That's why there tend to be less women in politics. Women's political views tend to be different than men's on average as well. Women tend to be more left-wing, more socially liberal. So in bringing this act in, that would effectively shift the centre of gravity of political debate. Whereas women on average would tend to be more sympathetic to the individual, men on average might look at the big picture of the well-being of a society. Whereas men might see patriotism, loyalty to your own group, your own nation as something very important, women would tend to see that as something less important. So by insisting on 50% male, 50% female, that's a way of manipulating political debate in Scotland. And the same way that bringing 16 and 17-year-olds into the electoral process as well would shift discussion. People know the views of these groups and they know the effect it would have of bringing them into the democratic process. Now, of course, 50% male, 50% female could be seen as old-fashioned, because obviously there are lots more genders than that. But you can see where this is heading. There'll also be quotas for LGBT people, quotas for race, quotas for different age, and you can see that's exactly the direction that a lot of people would like to see this heading. Now, the political process is already biased towards women significantly. If you join one of the mainstream political parties and apply to be a candidate, it's a significant advantage to be a woman. Including in the Conservatives, the Conservative Party as well say they're very keen to see more women parliamentarians. So if you apply as a woman, you're more likely to get through than if you apply as an equally qualified and able man. I think that's just unfair, but all the other parties think that's the way it should be. Now, having female MSPs, no problem at all, that's fine. But if you look at the Scottish Parliament, I do have a problem with the fact that when they're there, they spend such a high proportion of the time dealing with women's issues. They see themselves as feminist campaigners first and foremost, or a lot of them at least, rather than MSPs trying to run the country. Now, these feminist MSPs, they don't represent women. Now, how many of them represent the interests of the full-time mother? Okay, so if you have 50% MSPs women who are fired up to represent women's issues, how many of the men go in there thinking, I'm there to represent men's issue, to argue men's corner in the Parliament? As far as I can tell, none of them. Do I want them to? No, not really. I would rather have a Parliament where the MSPs are all committed to running the country for the benefit of everyone. But that's not the way things are heading at the moment. It's interesting in the Scottish Parliament, they have all the emphasis on equality and diversity. They're very proud of the number of female MSPs. But there's a huge imbalance in the debate when it comes to gender. If there's a debate on economy or the transport or whatever, you'll see lots of men in the debate. If the debate has something to do with children, then you'll see lots of women taking part, or women's issues as well. Huge imbalance. Now, some MSPs regard this as a problem to be solved in the Scottish Parliament. I've even heard the suggestion that there should be quotas for each debate to force men and women to equally represent themselves on different topics. It's madness. It's interesting, the newspaper report from the Scotsman that I showed at the beginning, there were 425 comments underneath it. Had a quick look through. They were virtually all saying they thought this is completely bonkers and not the way they want society to go. So again, a total disconnect between the political parties and the general public. So this idea is endorsed by the Electoral Reform Society, but it's originally coming from Women 50/50. And on the website it says what they're all about. They campaign for at least 50% representation of women in parliament, councils, and public boards. At least 50%. So they won't be happy until men are in a minority in those areas. Now, Women 50/50 has a steering group of 10 people, and you guessed it, 100% women. 50/50 only seems to apply when it suits. The leader of that group, Talat Yaqub, is involved with lots of other taxpayer-funded feminist organisations. She describes herself as a political campaigner quite clearly, but she's a political campaigner funded by my taxes. She also describes herself as a Muslim feminist. Now, Women 50/50 would claim not to be directly funded by the state, but if you look at their steering group, who that's composed of, there's a fair smattering of paid feminist campaigners who work for other taxpayer-funded feminist organisations in Scotland, and these organisations explicitly state their support for Women 50/50. So it's hard to imagine that these other staff of other organisations are not working on Women 50/50 as part of their paid role in these other organisations. For example, think about Emma Rich, the Executive Director of Engender, Scotland's feminist organisation. I mean, do we really believe that she goes home and works on Women 50/50 things on her dining table on her laptop? Do we really believe that when she goes to a meeting for Women 50/50, that's classed as time off work from Engender? I don't think so. This is taxpayer funding at arm's length. And the Scottish Family Party would defund all of these organisations because it's just taxpayer-funded political campaigning, and we would put an end to it. Now we'll have a look now at some other advice for political parties. This is the Equal Representation website. So let's see who's behind this. A whole range of government-funded organisations. BEMIS, Empowering Scotland's Ethnic and Cultural Minority Communities. CEMO, Strengthening Communities, Tackling Inequalities. Engender, taxpayer-funded feminists. Equality Network, taxpayer-funded LGBT organisation. Inclusion Scotland, disability we'll leave to one side. That's different from the other issues, so we'll leave that to one side. Stonewall, the aggressive gay rights organisation, and Women 50/50, as we've come across already. So lots of taxpayer money has gone into this advice for political parties. Let's see what they advise us. What do they say about manifestos? There is often a lot of content fit into a manifesto, which can mean that topics such as equality are cut from the document or not as prominent as they should be. When writing your manifesto, make sure that you consider from the beginning how your commitments to equality and diversity will be reflected. This could mean you have a specific section of your manifesto devoted to your equalities policies, or you could include relevant commitments throughout the document. You could also consider producing specific LGBTI, woman, ethnic minority, or disabled person manifestos with detailed policies relevant to each group. Well, thank you. We certainly will highlight our approach to equalities and diversity and make it clear that our policy is to put an end to the government-funded equality industry. These people don't seem to quite get the idea of democracy. It's not the job of the government to pay people to tell other political parties what to put into their manifesto. So it's time to do a test. Let's see how the Scottish Family fares on its procedures for selecting candidates. So, which positive actions to increase the number of LGBTI, disabled women and ethnic minority candidates do you use? Gender quotas, no. All women shortlist, no. All disabled shortlist, no. Targets for number LGBTI, women, etc., no. Zipping candidate list, that means where you go male, female, etc., no. When a sitting member steps down from a post, only people from underrepresented groups are able to stand in that seat, no. Mentoring and shadowing opportunities for people from underrepresented groups, no. Making financial support available for disabled candidates, that does sound a reasonable thing to consider. We haven't done it yet. Do you know the difference between diversity targets and quotas? Yeah, targets are bad, quotas are even worse. So yes, I do. Do you do background checks or ask people personal questions during candidate selection? Yes, I guess so, yeah. Who has responsibility for selecting candidates? A panel. Do your vetting selection panel receive guidance and or training about equality, diversity and unconscious bias? No. Do you collect equalities data about your members? No. Do you release equalities data about? No, no, no. During selection, do you ask potential candidates about their personal commitment to equality and diversity? No. Do you have training and development programs for people from underrepresented groups? No. Are there peer support or mentoring networks available to LGBTI? No. Here we go. Oh dear. Poor. We failed. So not surprised about most of that. How about this one? Do you do background checks or ask people personal questions during candidate selection? Background checks, that sounds pretty vital to me. I said yes. The answer should have been no. Revealing personal information about their life or history might be difficult for some people. For example, people from the trans community. So how have we arrived at this situation where the government thinks it's okay to fund organisations that then advise other political parties on how to run their affairs according to their own principles, the principles of so-called social justice? Well, they think it's okay because they never hear any dissent from those principles. And whose fault's that? I think a lot of the blame must go to the Scottish Conservatives, who just go along with the cosy consensus at Holyrood and don't challenge this philosophy. Now, if you really don't care about the gender, race, etc. of MSPs, then you need to be supporting us, the Scottish Family Party. Right, thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you want to follow our unique analysis of Scottish politics, subscribe on YouTube. And the other thing to say is we are a political party. We're not just another YouTube channel with moaning about the way things are. We want to change things. So go along, have a look at our website and get involved. Thanks.